Brian Mudd Show is on News Radio 610 WIOD.
Needle spiking. So I wasn't even familiar with this term really, or a potential concern that this could be something of a phenomenon. The last time, I think about needles and there really being some kind of like societal concern. Well, you remember the late 80s, early 90s, we had the HIV/AIDS scare where you had some of the, and I think it was more urban legend than it was anything. I do think there were a very isolated couple of situations that occurred, but where there'd be infected needles that would be stuck in places that people would end up pricking themselves on. Well, anyway, what about this now? This whole Astroworld situation has brought this greater into focus, and somebody who is taking a look at this, South Florida's own and now professor at Tarleton State University, criminologist, Dr. Alex Del Carmen. Dr. Del Carmen, what do you make of this needle spiking? Is this a thing?
Good morning, Brian, and thanks for having me. Well, it is a thing, right? So it's actually been going on for some time now, except that now it's received national media coverage in that, individuals are simply, stabbing security officers, police officers at times with needles to try to disable them from doing their job. So it's a real concern for law enforcement, as you can imagine, across the United States.
So this is something that has been evidently growing. How pervasive is it at this point?
Part of the problem is that when it's done, it's seldom reported. Oftentimes, believe it or not, even the individual that's receiving that needle, sometimes they don't feel it. Sometimes they feel it and they don't say anything because they can't believe that that's happening to them. And then other times it goes unreported for fear that they would be fired or that something would come back on them. And so we really don't know what that number looks like for real. But what we do know is that it is a practice that is growing across the United States.
Dr. Del Carmen, you take a look at what happened, this whole Astroworld thing, is they're trying to figure out the extent of what might have been. They've confirmed that at least some of this was in play during all of that. I mean, I guess part of the problem is it looks like it's effective.
Right. So when you add this particular method of disabling law enforcement or security officers in the presence of others, and then you add to that the chaos that we saw in this particular event where people were running through the metal detectors going unnoticed. You also had just a large number of people versus the number of security officers in presence and security concerns that the chief of police from Houston and others had actually verbalized days ahead. It's a perfect storm, right? And so this doesn't really help those of us that want to keep the rest of society safe.
So, Dr. Del Carmen, I mean, I imagine this is something that law enforcement agencies now have to take into account and have to train for. I mean, are there good methods for which, law enforcement can guard against this? It would seem like it's really challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging, right? Because part of the problem is how do you really challenge a person to not be stabbed by a needle in a crowded environment, other than perhaps giving them a double layer of clothing, having an additional partner join the ranks of the security officer or police officer so they can keep on the lookout. I mean, we don't really have needle detection mechanisms to be placed in where you have an audience of 15,000 people. And so it really has become a problem. I suspect that technology is going to help us a great deal in addressing it, but we have to definitely get ahead of this before we get caught up in the middle of another disaster in the coming weeks or months.
I mean, speaking outside of law enforcement, now you take a look at people attending events. How concerned should they be about this type of thing?
I always tell people that attend events that anytime you attend an event where there's going to be other people, there's going to be music, alcohol involved, you're increasing your chances of being victimized quite a bit. So to that end, I think we always have to remain vigilant. We always have to ensure that we're not around the crowd within the crowd that is the most violent and perhaps the one that's hyping to take some sort of a violent act against others. And we also have to always be constantly aware of our surroundings and make sure that we go with somebody else that's going to also look out for us. The concern is growing. We have the holidays, coming up, and I think that if we're not aware of some of these concerns, there may be other tragedies ahead in the near future.
Jeez. All right. Well, I mean, it's good information to have, even if it's not necessarily what we would like to hear. I was never a mosh pit kind of person anyway, so I kind of naturally skew away from the herd within the herd that you're talking about there. Criminologist, Dr. Alex Dale Carmen, it's always appreciated.
Thank you.